He was the heart of one of America's most iconic TV families, and now, the silence left behind is deafening. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, best known as Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, has tragically passed away at the age of 54. The beloved actor died in a drowning accident while vacationing alone in Costa Rica, according to early reports. But as details surrounding his death continue to emerge, fans are left grappling not just with the shock, but with the weight of what he left behind, especially a haunting final podcast episode that seemed to carry more meaning than we realized at the time. The news broke quietly at first. A local Costa Rican news outlet reported a tourist's body had been recovered from the water near a private beach resort. Soon after, confirmation came. It was Malcolm-Jamal Warner. For many, it didn't feel real. This was the same Malcolm who had always seemed grounded, thoughtful, and resilient, someone who weathered public storms but kept showing up with a quiet strength. He had been on a solo retreat, reportedly seeking rest and reflection. No foul play has been officially reported, but the circumstances, a solitary trip, a remote location, a rising tide, feel unsettling to fans who knew how deeply introspective Warner had become in recent years. And just days before his death, he left something behind, a message. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's final episode of Not All Hood now plays like a softly spoken letter to the world, an unintentional goodbye wrapped in quiet urgency. Titled "Resilience Isn't a Luxury," the episode was released just 3 days before his death. At first listen, it sounds like a deeply personal reflection, the kind Malcolm had grown comfortable sharing with his audience. But after the tragedy, the tone hits different. It's not just reflective, it's resolute, like a man unburdening himself. In the episode, Malcolm opens by questioning the emotional price of always having to be strong. He talks about the cultural myth of the unbreakable black man, how that narrative has been forced upon generations, and how damaging it can be. There's a difference, he says, between surviving and living, and I'm not sure we're always given the space to do the latter. It's a sentence that now hangs heavy in the air. He wasn't just talking about his own life. He was mapping out a shared reality, one felt by so many, but rarely articulated with this level of intimacy. He mentioned exhaustion, but not just in a physical sense. He described a deep-rooted fatigue, the kind that comes from constantly having to defend your identity, reinterpret your intentions, and still smile for the camera. Every room you walk into, you have to carry a version of yourself that makes them feel safe before you're allowed to be whole, he said. But what stood out most was what he didn't say. There was a lingering pause near the end, longer than usual, before he delivered his final thought. The most revolutionary thing you can do sometimes is stop running. No context, no follow-up, just silence. And then the outro music began. In hindsight, it's hard not to read into that silence. It wasn't theatrical. It was real. The kind of silence that signals something deeper. A chapter closing, perhaps not just in words, but in spirit. Whether Malcolm knew what was coming or whether he was simply at peace with what he had shared, no one can say for sure. But what's certain is this, that final recording wasn't just content. It was a release, a man laying down his burdens and letting the truth speak for itself. That episode now stands as more than just a podcast. It's a time capsule of thought, grief, clarity, and hope, wrapped in the voice of someone who was always reaching for something more honest than fame. And it leaves us with one lingering question. Did we listen closely enough when we still had the chance? From the moment Malcolm-Jamal Warner stepped into the role of Theo Huxtable, he captured something bigger than just screen presence. He embodied relatability. Unlike many child actors, whose fame peaks early and fades fast, Warner treated his breakout success as the beginning of a broader creative journey, not the destination. What made his career so unique wasn't just its longevity, it was its evolution. While many expected him to ride the wave of nostalgia or cling to typecast roles, Malcolm leaned in a different direction. He took time away from the spotlight to study, reflect, and sharpen his craft. He explored directing, writing, and music not for headlines, but for healing, both his own and his audience's. In television, he transitioned seamlessly into complex, mature roles. In Read Between the Lines, he played a thoughtful psychologist and father, showing that black masculinity could be tender, emotionally intelligent, and still strong. Later, on The Resident, His portrayal of Dr. A.J. Austin, a brilliant but grounded cardiothoracic surgeon, wasn't just compelling, it was groundbreaking. He brought depth, dignity, and a quiet intensity that made viewers rethink the archetype of the black professional on screen. But Warner's artistry extended far beyond acting. He was a serious musician, performing bass guitar with a soulful precision that mirrored his speaking cadence. His spoken word albums, like Selfless and Love and Other Social Issues, weren't just performances, they were statements. Through rhythm and rhyme, he tackled racism, love, fatherhood, and personal transformation. These works didn't aim for mainstream appeal. They aimed for honesty. He was never chasing celebrity. He was chasing substance. And in an industry that often rewards noise over nuance, that made Malcolm-Jamal Warner a quiet rebel. It's impossible to talk about Malcolm-Jamal Warner's legacy without addressing the long shadow cast by one of television's most devastating falls from grace, the Bill Cosby scandal. For years, The Cosby Show was held up as a shining example of black excellence in mainstream media. It wasn't just entertainment, it was cultural proof that a black family could be portrayed with nuance, success, and love on primetime TV. And at the heart of that family was Theo, the awkward, funny, and relatable son who felt like everyone's big brother or little cousin. But when Bill Cosby's years of alleged sexual abuse came to light, that legacy became contaminated. Suddenly, every rerun, every fond memory was reframed by horror and betrayal. And for the cast, especially someone like Malcolm, who had grown up in Cosby's spotlight, the fallout was personal and public. Warner didn't rush to comment. When he finally spoke out, it wasn't with tabloid rage or PR-safe deflection. It was with quiet discomfort and a deep sense of loss. In an interview, he admitted how painful it was to watch the destruction of something that had meant so much to so many. "There's no separating myself from The Cosby Show," he said. "It's part of who I am. But so is the disappointment." He never defended Cosby, but he also never denied the complexity. He stood in the middle of it, acknowledging the cultural importance of the show while refusing to gloss over the harm its creator caused. It was a tightrope walk that few could manage with integrity, but Malcolm did. What made his response different was that he didn't center himself in the scandal. He used the moment to talk about accountability, about how fame can shield predators, and how we must reckon with the harm done, even when it shatters our heroes. It wasn't just about Cosby, it was about the systems that protect power and silence victims. That willingness to go deeper, to ask the harder questions, is what set Malcolm apart. And yet, even as the scandal reshaped how people viewed the show, he continued to work, not by distancing himself from his past, but by adding layers to his present. His art evolved, his voice grew sharper, and through it all, he stayed rooted in truth, even when it was uncomfortable. He knew that healing doesn't come from erasure, it comes from reckoning. And that's what he offered. Not excuses, not spin, but a reckoning, one that's still rippling through the culture he helped shape. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was never one to dodge the hard questions. In fact, he leaned into them, even when the industry didn't want him to. In an era when many celebrities were building their brands on curated silence, Warner was risking his career to have real conversations. On Not All Hood, he dismantled the illusion of success in Black Hollywood, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep need to confront the contradictions of being visible, celebrated, and still systemically marginalized. He often spoke about how black creatives are expected to be both digestible and powerful, a nearly impossible balance. "They want us to be brave," he once said, "but only if our bravery doesn't make them uncomfortable." He called out the emotional cost of performing strength without having space to process pain. He questioned why so many black stories in media were centered on suffering, with little room for nuance, complexity, or joy. What set Warner apart was his refusal to give in to cynicism. He didn't just criticize, he offered insight. His words weren't meant to burn bridges, but to light a path forward. He urged listeners, especially young black men, to stop measuring themselves against standards that were never made for them. And he held his own community accountable too, challenging the internalized ideas that often go unspoken, from toxic masculinity to generational silence around mental health. And all of this wasn't abstract theory, it was personal. You could hear it in his pauses, in his deliberate choice of words, in the quiet emotion that laced every sentence. This wasn't a man playing a role. This was a man laying himself bare. Even when it meant going against the grain, Warner chose truth. And that truth didn't always trend, but it stuck. It stayed with people. It made them uncomfortable in the way growth always does. In the aftermath of his death, conversations have started surfacing. Uncomfortable ones. Why is it that so many Black public figures who challenge dominant narratives seem to leave us under mysterious or sudden circumstances? From Nipsey Hussle to Chadwick Boseman, from Maya Angelou to Michael K. Williams, the pattern isn't a conspiracy, but it's a reminder. These are people who spoke boldly, lived loudly, and often died with unfinished conversations still hanging in the air. Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't just pass away, he left mid-sentence. And now we're left to finish the story. At 54, he had already lived many lifetimes. As a child star, a grown artist, a teacher through his work, he challenged Hollywood's idea of Black masculinity. He redefined what it means to grow up in the public eye and still emerge with your soul intact. He didn't need flashing headlines. He needed you to listen. And now we need to carry his words forward. Because the final lesson he left us wasn't about grief, it was about truth. And the courage it takes to tell it. If this story moved you, take a moment. Share this video, like, and subscribe. And check the description for a link to his final podcast episode. Malcolm-Jamal Warner had something to say, and it's up to us to keep the conversation alive.